So this is an article I call your attention to. Okay, so this is published on the New York Times just 2 days ago. And you'll be horrified to find out the full list of all the environmental laws that have been reversed by the current administration. So last, I want you to briefly know what are the other parties affecting the decision making. One group is One type of groups is non-governmental organizations, and those environmental groups were aided by amended tax laws, which give them a lot of benefits when they go into those environmental activities. And they are eligible to receive government grants and contracts. And I want to point out United States environmental groups have one important right to sue for environmental interests. The second thing I want to mention here is the rule of lobbying. And this is big business. This is where money talks, not completely money, but money play a great influence here. And there are three major groups: industries and trade associations, nonprofit public interest groups, and science and research organizations. And I want to bring up this table in front of you. This is on textbook 475. And if we look at the table here, in 2016, environmental organizations top 5 and versus oil and gas industry top 5, you can see the money expenses is tenfold. The oil and the gas has almost tenfold of those environmental organizations. And I want you to look at a table, which is a very big table on textbook 474. It's called, the title of the table is Major U.S. Environmental and Resource Conservation Legislation. So this is not completely the picture of this table, but I want you to take a look at the table and have a fun activity here. What is a fun activity? I have a question for you. How many environmental laws were passed before and after 1980? And after you count those, you will see about like 2/3 of the laws which we benefit a lot, like Clean Air, Clean Water Act, all published before 1980. That was way before you were born. and many laws were published even before I was born. So my point is, the clean environment you live in today is a result of the great efforts from the previous generations. And thinking about that, and I think we should do the same to our future generations too. So, lastly, not leastly, I want to introduce a little bit about the role of the Environmental Protection Agency, which is EPA. Until 1970, most federal agencies act within their authority without considering of environmental problems. So people did not realize this is interrelated issue. So many federal agencies just do their own thing. In 1970, the EPA was established by Congress to implement statutes. So in 1970, this really important decision was made. We have to have a new federal agency to carry out those statutes, and we need to have a single branch, executive branch, to deal with environmental problems. Administrative functions empower EPA, the states, and private citizens. And pay attention here, there's EPA, not EPA alone, the states and the private individuals to take responsibility for enforcing the various authorized programs. So that is not the only job for EPA. We all are part of it. And the states, the counties, the regions, we have to work together to enforce those authorized environmental programs. So typically, this is the enforcement procedure of the EPA. Say we have a really bad air pollution problem in Los Angeles. So what are we going to do? So EPA will issue a warning letter first to describe alleged violation and outline actions that must be taken to. That is the first step. EPA send out a warning. And the second step, an administrative order that requires certain activity to be ceased or to be done by a certain date, or requires certain tasks to be performed and provide rights. Okay? So that is the second order. That is more detailed than the first order, like exactly what you need to do. And the third step is permit action. If you don't listen to EPA, your permit could be revoked or be modified. And seek to add conditions to permits that are being negotiated. You can talk to EPA and there will be agreement reached. So the fourth step is the civil enforcement and the monetary relief, a fine, right? By each violation, injunctive, that is civil. And if things get really bad, all those previous steps did not work, EPA will take you to the court. That is criminal proceedings. You're facing fines and even going to the jail. So EPA basically, in the early days, some of the laws are good examples of very rigid standards. Why? Because it's pretty bad. As I teach you in this semester, how bad the air could be and how bad the water pollution could be, how bad the hazardous waste pollution could be. So we reach to the point, everything has to be done immediately. So the command and control philosophy of EPA, they have very rigid standards you have to follow immediately. And we are facing, when you carry out the law, you're facing a bunch of problems. All those problems have several traits in common. First is complexity. And the second is polarization. Complexity, it means it involves different parties and innumerable options and trade-offs. Polarization means the conflicts between parties. Winners and the losers. There's always somebody win, somebody lose. Somebody have benefits and somebody suffer. Delayed consequences. There's no immediate fix, such as hazardous waste, right? When we find this problem, it was probably early 50s or early 60s, but when we fix it, we're still fixing it today. After 50, 70 years later, we're still fixing them today. And so no immediate fix and benefits, if any, will often not be evident for decades. And the national versus regional conflict, an ambiguous role for science. So science is often not pivotal in evaluating policy options, but science often ends up serving inappropriately as a surrogate for debates. So people take advantage of science. They choose to just present a piece of information or partial facts. That is not the truth. That is not the whole science, right? So unfortunately, in reality, sometimes science got taken advantage of. But they do achieve very marvelous results. For example, this river in Cleveland, Ohio, this is before 40 or 50 years ago. You can see how dirty the water is. And there are so many pollutions constantly caught fire. The last fire caught is 1969. And after EPA enforced this Clean Water Act, this is the result we see today. It is clean air, clean water, right? Although this is Clean Water Act, you see the air quality is greatly improved also.